Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile 1 video, and in this one we're going to talk about my first draft of a PoB for the Servant of our Kali Legacy of Phrecia Ascendancy class reveal for a Poison SRS and Spider build that we've made, and I'm really actually very excited about this. It seems like it's going to be my starter. I haven't decided just yet, but let's crack into it. But before we do that, I just want to point out that I look like a mess. I'm not even wearing my headset. My daughter had an ear infection that I now have, so I'm chewing on antibiotics and feeling like absolute fucking shit. Anyways, let's crack into the PoB. I'm going to show you a low-budget version of this into a medium-budget version. There's some pretty cool, interesting stuff in here. Let's crack into it. The PoBs that I'm showing here in this video is not yet 100% finished. I will be fine-tuning and polishing this a little bit because it is currently missing some crucial details. For example, I have initial leveling points, which I'll talk about first in this video. Then we have a low-budget PoB and a medium-budget PoB skill tree. But I'm going to show you how PoB operates for all of you new players that's coming in from Path of Exile 2, joining in Path of Exile 1. I will also have a video coming in a couple of days that's going to show you guys some tips and tricks on what to think about when you're coming into Path of Exile 1 as your very first time, but having some experience from Path of Exile 2, so I'll talk a little bit about the differences and whatnot. Let's focus on this build here in this video. So the first thing we're going to keep in mind is that we are going to be playing this as what's called a shadow. The shadow has a couple of different ascendancy nodes, or ascendancy classes rather, which are not going to be available in this event. Instead, we have some 3 new ones for this specific event, and we're going to choose the Arakali, or Servant of the Arakali. What this means is that we're going to be leveling in a very different way than we would with a normal minion build, as we normally try to weave into the idea of leveling with minions. We're not going to do this with this build. Instead, the first points we do when we level is going to be for chaos and physical damage nodes, taking up the coordination, as well as picking up Willow Blaze, Sleight of Hand, as well as entropy, picking up the mana, and then life, and then we're going to start moving our way into these minion nodes before changing our entire build into plain minions. The reason for this is because the Shadow doesn't get access to any sort of minion skills until you get access to an NPC called Phrecia, which you can kill and get buy these gems from in Act 3 library. So that means that we're not going to do any of this until we get to our first lab, essentially. So in Act 3, we get access to the first labyrinth, which is how you ascend and get ascendancy points in Path of Exile 1. So essentially, we'll be using a certain skills, which I'll show you here in the PoB, and we'll have a written guide for this posted pretty soon as well. So you'll play with this till you get the first labyrinth done, as well as the Phrecia quest. Now you'll pick up what's called Envy, which is a free chaos damage aura that your character's ascendancy class will provide you. And once you have that, that's when we can change into minions. In the skills section, you can check the little drop-down menu here and go to Act 1, showing that the damage supports that you'll be using up to level 12 will be a Cobra Lash, supported by Chance to Poison, and if you have a 3 socket, it will be either added Cold or added Lightning. We'll be also using a Blade Trap skill for single target bossing, and this will be supported by multiple traps, and if you have a 3 socket, add an added Cold or added Lightning to it. And we'll be using Whirling Blades, which will later link together with faster attacks, and I like to have Frost Blink as a separate skill as well, as you can use both Whirling Blades as well as Frost Blink right after each other. At level 12, when you get access to the last zone in Act 1 called the Mervale's Cavern, I think it is, or Caverns of Hate, you get access to level 12 gems before the Mervale fight, which is the last boss of Act 1. At this point, you will remove your Cobra Lash and instead run a skill called Venom Gyre. Venom Gyre will be supported by Chance to Poison, as well in a 3-link be supported with Volley. And every time you use your Whirling Blades, you'll shoot out more of these Venom Gyre projectiles. And this is going to be your bread and butter damage approach up until Act 3. If you scroll over here to the Act 2 in the skills section, you'll now see that the Venom Gyre is your main source of skills. You have your single target approach, you have your mobility, and in Act 2 you get access to Herald Auras, in which we'll use Herald of Agony for the extra 20% chance to poison, and we'll use Herald of Purity, for more damage, and then we'll have Blood Rage to speed things up. In Act 3, there's 2 different versions. One is before the lab is done, which is basically going on with the same approach that we have in Act 2, all the way up until we've done the lab, and now you're switching over in that library area to the NPC called Phrecia. You'll buy yourself Raging Spirit, or in best case scenario, you'll have a friend buy this for you earlier, or you can mule one by leveling a witch to finish the Mudflats quest, breaking some eggs to give you the SRS gem before you start playing your Shadow, and you can just slot this gem in and have that on your weapon swap to make sure the Raging Spirit gem is leveled up as you play. And we'll be adding melee splash, minion damage, and the fourth socket, if you have a 4-link, will be faster attacks. We can now change our claw or dagger into anything, like a wand if you find one. But we can also add a shield and instead run shield charge with fast attacks together with Frostblink. You can also keep the Whirling Blades. It's a preferential decision. However, our auras are now going to turn into a lower level precision depending on how much mana you need and run Purity of Elements. And we'll be using this Despair as a curse because now it's all about the Ascendancy node that gives you the Envy aura to apply as much flat chaos damage to our SRS minions, the Radiant Spirits. Later on, we are going to be picking up this little node over here, which means that we'll be spending Energy Shield as a resource to cast our spells. And at that point, we don't need our mana. We can reserve all of our mana for auras instead. However, that will be later, which will be shown in the finalized full version of this PoB, which at the time of this recording is not done. In the item sections, we have low budget, medium budget AG. We have low budget and medium budget endgame PoBs. So what you want to do in terms of navigating path of building is if you encounter content creators that provides you with fully operational path of buildings, you'll be clicking at the loadout button here in the top right corner. And if you choose low budget endgame, every single setting and every page on the entirety of this path of building should be accurately set for low budget. So to show you, if I change the skill to act and I change this to an AG and I change this here to, configuration to medium. But if I now click on the loadouts and say, well, I want to see how this build operates on low budget. If I click on this one, the configuration settings is all set and accurate for the low budget. I go to items, my setting now is showing low budget. Skills is showing low budget. My skill tree is showing the low budget. So this is an easy way for you to navigate and see if the PoB is good so that you can actually navigate easier. Obviously, we'll have a written guide for those of you who prefer to read through the details of everything. So this is how you can operate with that. You can also change to a medium budget, which is going to cost you more currency. And there, see that now we're using a cluster jewel up here. Tree is very similar. In the skills section, we have medium budget on the endgame tree, and also the configuration is now also set for medium budget. But enough of that. Let's not waste more time. Let's talk about the skill tree. At this point, when we do the respec, we no longer have these three notables or the coordination or these chaos damage nodes. Instead, we're going straight out here, picking up some life nodes. We're picking up some aura nodes, Eldritch Battery to cast our spells. We get some block nodes. It is very important that we use Grave Intentions later on. The only time this is important is when you get yourself an item called Ancient Skull, which I'll talk about in a bit. It's a very cheap, very common, unique. And other than that, the tree is very straightforward. We are going to want a little bit of an additional accuracy for our SRS minions. So picking this one up as a mastery is very, very, very effective. Other than that, it's just block nodes, reservation nodes, life, and minion nodes. It's very straightforward and easy to grasp. As most of you that are aware of how to operate and look at PoBs like this, you'll see that the defenses are absolutely atrocious. And this is because the low budget is exactly that. It is extremely, extremely low budget. This PoB will get you through the endgame content, and you could beat out and kill some of the endgame pinnacle bosses with this. I wouldn't recommend doing that at this budget. I think that around yellow tier maps or start of red tier maps, you're going to want to transition into the higher budget version, in this case, medium budget, before you start going towards the endgame pinnacle bosses. I'm just saying what is possible, and this is what we're doing with PoBs from my end and the type of content that I deliver on PoE 1. So this is the skill tree, and I'm going to talk about a few major things. First and foremost, the way this system works in PoE 1 is very tricky for PoB when it comes to this event. All of the ascendancies are essentially shown in a form of a jewel, and we're bypassing this by adding these modifiers in a custom modifier link. So in this case, we're starting off with picking up the Envy skill, like I mentioned before, and the second skill that you'll be picking up is actually going to be the poison. The poison chance from skin crawlers, I believe it is. I might be off here, but we'll double check this before this becomes public. And the third one will be the spiders on kill. So we'll be using Radiant Spirits or poison, but also spiders. And then you're going to be lastly adding the penance mark, which is a mark curse that makes it so that every now and then it will spawn an enemy from whoever is cursed, which you then will kill. And kills that you do will spawn spiders based on how many corpses are on the ground near that kill. And since when minions do a killing blow with a damage over time effect, such as poison, that counts as your player kill, which allows us to trigger this without needing other mechanics to make kills count as ours. So this is how we create spiders versus bosses. Small passives from the Ascendancy gives us up to 60% minion damage. And there's some information about Animate Guardian, showing Leercast and Dying Breath. And it does require Gruthkul's Pelt. And I don't think you should use an Animate Guardian until you have a Gruthkul's Pelt myself. So if you do this without Animate Guardian and all those things, you'll lose a little bit of damage, and later on you'll apply it. This modifier here is just to compensate because Path of Building is putting Onslaught on all your minions, because that we are using that in medium budget. You can't get rid of this. So in the configuration in low budget, this is just here to compensate, to make sure the numbers are not inflated. Another thing to point out is that when you look at PoBs, always look if the enemy is considered a boss, and it should be a Guardian or Pinnacle boss listed in the PoB for it to be accurate. Other than that, it's very straightforward. This is how we're going to be applying the Ascendancy nodes. The gods we're using for Pantheon is going to be Solo Lunaris and then Gruthkul. And the skill system is very simple. In our body armor, we'll be using Radiant Spirit with Unleash to cast as many of them as we can. We'll be using Chance to Poison to make sure the poison chance is 100. We'll have minion damage, then Void Manipulation, and for single target, we'll use Multi-Strike, and for better comfortability and efficiency for clearing, you'll switch to Multi-Strike with a Melee Splash support. We'll have a trigger weapon, and what a trigger weapon is, that in Act 8, I believe it is, you will be able to pick up a bench craft from one of these zones there that allows you to put a craft on a weapon that triggers socketed spells when you use a skill with an 8-second cooldown. And that allows you to have Desecrate and a Flesh Offering with a spell Cascade. Not sure if the spell... most likely it's going to be like this with a 2-link, 1 socket. And what you're going to do is you're going to have Flesh Offering not linked with Spell Cascade. So instead, it will look like this, where Flesh Offering is going to be separated. You want to have a Desecrate linked with Spell Cascade, which allows you to generate more corpses than what your Flesh Offering is consuming. And the reason for this is so that you can leave more corpses up for the sake of your spider generation on single target bosses, because they need corpses around the target to summon your spiders. And then for golems, we're using a stone golem with this approach in the low budget. Feeding Frenzy, because that gives a minion damage buff to all your other minions. Minion life to keep the golem alive. Utility minions, we'll be using Raise Spectre, Minion Life, Animate Guardian, and Meat Shield. You don't have to use this. It is recommended. I would wait till you're late. If you're experienced with the game, just go for it when you know when to use it. If you're a new player, I would wait till your Animate Guardian is level 18 or higher before you use it. If you have the Helmet Ancient Skull, do not use the Animate Guardian unless he has a Gruthkul's Pelt. I will show this in the item section here in a second. Mobility and Convocation. Convocation is used to teleport your minions to you, get them out of harm's way and all of that. And it also moves your spiders to you, which is very effective. We'll have a Shield Charge with faster attacks linked together, and we can have Frostblink and Convocation can be separated, doesn't need to be linked. Aura-wise, we'll be using Tempest Shield for block chance, for spells, Determination for extra armor. Yes, armor is not as bad in PoE as it is in PoE 2. We actually want armor. Precision to help accuracy, a little bit of crit, we don't really care too much, but the accuracy for our minions. Purity of Elements gives us tons of resistances and our minions resistances. We also get the availability of becoming completely immune to elemental ailments such as Shock, Ignite, and Freeze. Very comfortable. Spectre-wise, if you decide to use Spectres, we will be utilizing one Arena Master, slightly inflated DPS output from the Arena Master. I'll just admit that right away. We are going to, it is averagely calculating PoB, so it's not inflating it that much. However, the Arena Master is only going to be in the low budget where we don't expect the player to purchase expensive corpses used for Spectres in the higher end game. And we'll use 2 Carnage Chieftains. These generate Frenzy charges. And no, you will not be expecting me to put in configuration to have more than 1 charge at all times. This is simply because the Spectres will cast its ability once every 4 seconds, generating 2 charges to you and your minions as long as you're in combat. However, with SRS minions, they're going to be cycling through. So once a new minion spawns and replaces an old one, that new one doesn't have a charge anymore until one of those Spectres generates it. So therefore, I'm only averagely calculating 1 frenzy charge instead. So that's how that works. Moving over to items, which is where you're going to see how and why this is so ridiculously cheap. The weapon itself is simple +1 level of minion skills or spell skills with a pretty decent amount of minion damage, I'll say that. And it has this trigger craft that I was referring to before. That doesn't have to be a 1, but it is preferable to be on a 1 because these Convoking, Calling, and Convening ones can roll minion mods. So you can get a much better one than this quite effectively and cheap. The shield, however, is a low minion damage with +1 level of minion skills. There's not even a life mod in here. You can sacrifice some of the damage by adding life instead. You can skip the level of minions to keep the cost down even further if you so choose to. There's only one resistance roll, which is a benchcraft. So getting a better shield is extremely something common that's going to... Jesus, I can't even speak. That's how bad I'm feeling right now. I apologize. It's going to be very common that people find much better shields than this. The Ancient Skull is the helmet I was talking about. So the Ancient Skull enables a lot of things. It is worth quite a lot of damage, about 650,000 in this current PoB, which is looking like it is not including the spiders when we're bouncing around. There we go, it's 3.3 million. This DPS will be higher, by the way, because the spiders in PoB is calculating level 1 spiders. We're going to have level 20 spiders, so the damage will be significantly higher than what's shown in PoB right now. Ancient Skull, what it does is that when one of your minions deals a critical strike chance, and then their crit strike chance goes up with the max charges they can have, so they actually get the crit strike chance very high, they begin to hear whispers. This whisper effect is going to make them not listen to you. This doesn't matter. SRS don't listen to you anyways, so you can't manually control them. So they will just be super aggressive, and they will deal stupid amount of attacks because they do so much faster attacks with this. It's a super effective helmet, and it costs almost nothing. It's super common. It'll be very cheap. Even if the item becomes popular to be used, it will still remain to be a very cheap item. However, when they hear a whisper, they're going to take chaos damage per second. This is countered by keeping the Animate Guardian alive by using something called a Gruthkul's Pelt armor. Gruthkul's Pelt is giving the Animate Guardian, if you put it on them, 10% of his life regenerated. Very, very effective. And like I mentioned with the skill tree, when you decide to use the Ancient Skull, you want to pick up Grave Intentions. This gives your minions better defenses, but most importantly, chaos resistances to counter this effect from happening. And that's how we're going to use the low budget approach. The body armor, obviously, it's going to have a lot better stats than this because this one has nothing. The recommendation is to have a pure energy shield base to get yourself a lot of energy shield, since we will be using that to spend for our skills. We use an energy shield base, and the idea is that you buy a corrupted chest piece with the correct colors. And when I say correct colors, we're going to put Raging Spirits in here. So if you go to skills and you check out the SRS, blue, 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 that's 3 blue, 2 green, and 1 red, because we're switching those two for single target versus clearing. So 3 blue, 2 green, and 1 red. That's how you search for it in the system for trading. And I'll show you how to do this search myself right here on the stream. So on the video, you will search for a body armor like this. Then you can put 1 in energy shield to make sure there's energy shield on it. And then you'll go to links, and we said 1 red, 2 green, and 3 blue. That's how you search for the body armor. And most of the cases, the cheapest ones is going to be listed, and they will very likely be corrupted 6 links that people don't want. Now, this league has obviously been out for a while, so the prices are extremely wild. Can't really compare this to how it would be on a league launch. So these are very, very expensive compared to what it's supposed to be. Only 6 showing. You will see hundreds of this very, very early in the league. But as you can see here, you'll get some extra energy shield. You even have 48 lightning res. Some of them come with life modifiers. Some of them don't. So the only thing that I want to point out here is that if your body armor ends up having 0 life modifiers, you can actually spec into a life modifier here saying 10% increased life if you're, 15% increased life if there are no life modifiers on your body armor, which you will pick up if your chest piece that you get doesn't have a life modifier. So that's how you navigate your chest piece. You can do the same thing with a 5 link. And if you do a 5 link instead of 6 to keep the cost down, the first support gem that you remove is Void Manipulation, which removes one of the green sockets from this item. In this PoB, as you can see, I've decided not to show any modifiers on the chest at all, and we're still way beyond the resistance caps, even having some chaos res very easily. The gloves, just generic energy shield gloves. If you find energy shield with armor, that's actually preferable in some cases. In the gloves, I decided to put a dexterity modifier. You can get dex on your rings instead, but I put it on the gloves in this case. You want to have life on every single item that can have life on them. Unless the chest piece doesn't have any life, then you put the mastery node on the skill tree instead. Remember to remove that if you change the chest to a chest that has a life. Just keep that in mind. And other than that, it's just energy shields preferable. You want to make sure you have enough attributes to use all your gems and all your gear and all that. And boots, the #1 priority is movement speed. Movement speed is not just a speed efficiency for clearing faster or quality of life. It is directly connected to being a defensive modifier to step out of the fuck of the way from harm's way. So make sure you have a good movement speed, 25, 30% preferably. You can even go 35, but then you usually cost a bit more. The second priority is a life modifier, and then you have any resistances and or attributes you might need for your character. The Jinx Juju is a very, very popular used early budget, low budget minion amulet. It makes it so that damage you take from hits is taken from your specters instead of your life. So a good amount of mitigation from there. It also gets you some decent strength and dexterity stat, as well as some increased efficiency of your non-curse auras. But it also gives some chaos rest. If you don't have access to this, get an amulet where the priority is to make sure there's life on it, to fix your attributes and or resistances till you can get something like this. It's fine. If you decide to put some oils with an anointment, the anointment is Death Attunement, which is up here, which is going to be done with a clear crimson and a silver oil. First day or two, silver oils can be a little pricey. Don't worry about it. Wait with it later. Maybe even skipping oiling it in the low budget. It's up to you, but it's very effective to give you an extra specter in the end. The rings are very straightforward. I'm using bone rings. You can use a gloam ring, or only one gloam ring on the left slot, or you can use resistance rings. It's perfectly fine either way. Get some chaos rest if you're not needing the other resistances, because the priority is get a life mod on every piece that can get it, and then the next priority is whatever rest or attributes you need. If you're covered on elemental resistances and attributes, the next priority is chaos resistance. If you can get that, great. Minion damage is okay. A better modifier would actually be increase attack and cast speed for minions, because attack speed is extremely valuable for poisoning minions. So I have two of those rings. We're using a belt, just a generic rare belt with stats, attribute, res. Later on, we'll be using what's called a Darkness Enthroned belt. Comes from the Abyssal Encounters. I'll show you this in the medium budget here in a bit, but this will be the way to play it, which requires the mandatory use of Ghastly Eye jewels. And this belt would scale the efficiency those jewels bring to keep, again, the budget down to ridiculously cheap efficiency. This is what I do. Flask-wise, we are running double life flask. You don't have to do double life flask. I like doing it on low budget. It also helps new players come in, especially for the guys that are watching this that's coming from Path of Exile 2, joining PoE 1. Start with 2 life flask. I like to roll one to have instant heal and the other one as a regenerative heal, and sometimes I like having 2 instant heals. The effervescent roll here makes it so that you have a reduced amount of life that is recovered. However, a portion of it is recovered instantly instead. And then the suffix modifier in this case is something you can craft with bestiary in the game. But what you want is a removal of bleed effects from you. And I like to have both of my life flasks apply this immunity to bleed. So if I get bled, I can just click this flask and the bleed's gone. Super effective. Now you might see that I have a Quicksilver flask, which is increased movement speed. And I have a Basalt flask, which gives you more armor, but also taunts enemies. Keep that in mind. And a Granite flask that gives you flat armor. So the Basalt and Granite scales each other, if you will. But none of them have any modifiers in the PoB. And the reason for that is that there is one modifier that you really want, which is called Transgressor. It makes you get more charges to the flask when you take a hit. Even if you block the hit, you'll still get it. However, those are going to be a bit pricey. So whatever modifiers you get in this is perfectly fine. So to show you that I made this PoB not having any modifiers in these, you just do whatever with them. And whatever you end up with, keep that. Because you're not going to spend currency on these flasks in the low budget. When it comes to the jewels that we'll be using for this specific build, and this build will take you up to level 92, or at least the PoB will, the first and foremost important part is that one of your jewels will have to have the modifier that says minions have a % chance to poison enemies on hit. Luckily, you get 90% chance to poison enemies with this setup, which means that you only need 10% from one jewel. The lowest mod roll that you can get from a jewel with this mod is 10%. So make sure that one of your jewels have this. That's it. Any other modifier that you want to scale your damage comes in the form of flat chaos damage to your minions. And again, like I've said before, any rare items should have a life modifier on them. Do not neglect this. Too many times I've helped people out that needed help with their builds and they don't have life in the gear and they're asking why they're dying. That is why. Make sure there's a life on it as well, okay? With a poison jewel, it's okay if it only has life and the poison. You don't have to have more to keep the cost down. That's your main priority, life and poison. The other jewels are just life and a flat data chaos. You can have modifiers that gives you +2 increased minion damage when you've used a minion skill recently, which we will use all the time, which is perfectly fine. But Flat Deadly Chaos would be the better approach for this specific build. And that kind of finalizes the approach of the low budget PoB, which is very, very simple, very straightforward, and extremely cheap. And the DPS is saying 3.3 million. It will be higher since we don't know how much more damage the spiders will actually be doing. So that's how the low budget approach works. So I'm going to tackle the medium budget a bit. First off, the skill tree gets a little changes. We're cutting a bit of life nodes. Some jewel nodes goes away to be moved, as now we're focusing on getting some more block focus here. We're sitting on 65, 68. The cap is 75. So we're not capped, but we're getting very good defenses. We have almost 100,000 EHP pool. It's a little kind of awkward to look at the EHP from PoBs because it's not really a good metric to go by. The max hits is good numbers to go by, but again, we've kept the budget as low as we could for a medium budget. I'm sure you'll find other creators posting out builds out there that has, much higher numbers and whatnot. And in more cases than not, you'll see a big difference in the currency cost investment for these things. So this is what we've done, and we've chosen to run with spiders instead of the classical approach and not running the spiders. I'm very happy with this personally. We're setting out very good defensive layers. We're using a large cluster jewel with minion damage with only 8 passives, in which we're only picking up the Call to Slaughter. Now, there are 3 or 4 different jewels you can do with this, as long as the jewel has notables Call to Slaughter, which is a suffix, and a Rotten Claw, Renewal, and I think Skeletal Atrophy. Those will end up in this position so that Call to Slaughter ends up here or instead of back here. So you want it here. This allows you to pick up a small cluster here, which will be an one with the shield to get you higher defensive gains from your shield, but also 6% chance to block attacks. And then on the right-hand side, we're using a medium minion life cluster for Blessed Rebirth, which makes it so that your minions who are recently summoned, very important for SRS on the higher endgame content, that they are immune to damage for the first 4 seconds as they're being summoned. And then next part is a small cluster with increased armor, 2 passive with Enduring Composure, which gives you an endurance charge if you've been hit recently, and that happens over the course of 4 seconds. So you get 1 endurance charge per second for 4 seconds, and that is also why this build is spec in endurance here, so we can actually have 4 endurance charges, which are very good for defensive mitigation. We are no longer using the accuracy because we're going to have a high level effect, of precision aura, so we don't need that mastery. However, we're using minion recovered life on death. We're using increased effective offerings and stuff like that instead, which you'll see in this PoB. Very straightforward in general. We're going to be using Eldritch Battery, but this time we're actually adding Mind Over Matter so that now incoming damage is taken from our energy shield pool instead of our life. And that is a 40%, and this is calculated with basic algebra, which means that this is not equivalent to 40% more effective HP. It's equivalent to 66.67%, as long as you have enough energy shield, which is why this build is using Aegis Aurora in this higher budget version, so that anytime we take hits that we're blocking, we recover a lot of that, our percent of our armor as energy shield to fully help sustain that energy shield. And I think that'll going to be more than enough. I decided to run a physical damage taken when you're on full energy shield, because that will happen more often than not that you're on full energy shield with this build. If you happen to find yourself not being in that position, you could change this to a regenerating 2% of energy shield per second. I don't think that's going to be needed, which is why I have it like this. Obviously, if I decide to play this myself, I'll figure this out in the first day or two. However, item-wise, we are changing to the beloved Covenant. I believe this chess piece is going to be hilariously expensive in the first few days of the event because of the popularity of poison minion builds. So we'll be using this as a high budget approach. Obviously, the correct colors and all that. Edit high budget version, we'll use corrupted versions of this. But just keep in mind that this is where your socketed SRS will go, and it will do tons of damage. This is worth 4.3 million DPS according to PoB right now. Now, I'm not going to go through a full detail on everything for the medium budget. What I will say is that the PoB is showing 10.5 million DPS. This is with level 1 spiders. It will be significantly higher once we know how much level 20 spiders will do instead. And I'll just give you a quick rundown. So in here, we're now going to be starting to use hybrid pieces, armor, energy shield, since we'll need the energy shield to compensate mind over matter. But we also want the armor to help mitigate physical damage taken. And we're going to use some Eldritch currency implicit modifiers, such as in the helmet. We'll have physical damage taken as cold because our Aegis Aurora gives us plus max cold rest, which will help us mitigate more damage. Run plus level of minion skills on the helmet, very, very important. Gloves will have some increased damage. I didn't know what else to put on the other implicit, so the only thing giving us something is spell suppression, which 5% is completely irrelevant. But other than that, it's just attribute resistances. Make sure there's a life mod on every single rare item. Again, like I mentioned before, boots, movement speed. In this case, the implicit modifier is to use increased effect of Chaos Golem, because we're switching to that, since we're already regenerating 500 life per second without even having life regeneration modifiers on our gear. So we're regenerating quite a lot of our life, and the Chaos Golem gives us physical damage mitigation, so we're increasing the efficiency of that buff. Again, movement speed, life, and then resistances, chaos rest attributes, whatever you need. We're still using a Jinxed Juju. We're going over to using a Gloam Ring with a medium budget. And in here, I added dexterity, life, and I added some minion damage. If you have enough suffix modifiers to cover your attributes and rest elsewhere, having increased attack and cast speed would significantly increase the damage here, but it would also increase the cost of these items. So again, I've been trying to keep the budget extremely low in this build. And we are using a Darkness Enthroned. However, unlike the low budget version, we're going to need more poison chance. We need 50%. A good way to do this is having like a 90% plus Darkness Enthroned, which means that these jewels here, which is 13% chance to poison, would have 13 times 1.93. So it's 25%. And by having two of those 13 with a mod like this would put me at 50% plus the Ascendancy, giving me 100% chance to poison. So you'd have to do some calculation depending on what jewels you have or what belt you have. You might need to add a third poison jewel elsewhere, but this is an effective way to do that on the medium budget. And of course, having a damage modifier on top of that. A jewel like this could be pretty expensive specifically. So I think that the poison jewels, what I'm going to do to make sure the budget is kept in check, is I'm going to remove the damage recently from these here in this PoB. And just save that. It'll lower the damage a little bit, but I'm perfectly fine with that decision, just to make sure that the PoB is as low as possible. However, just keep in mind with the poison chance. And then the other gear we're using, yet again, we are using one of those instant 50% instant roll life flask with removal of bleed. We're using a Rumi's concoction, which is an increased chance of blocking. That's how we can keep up with a very high chance of blocking. We have this time the Flagellant or Transgressor in this type. It's the highest tier. These are the flasks I was talking about. We have Basalt, Granite, Quicksilver. One of them will be having a suffix that increases your armor, such as Armadillo. We have a movement speed flask, which I took the lowest tier because these usually cost a lot of money. And the third one would be a reduced effect of curses on you flask. So those are the three suffixes on flasks that you would want. The regular jewels is simple damage with damage recently, like I talked about before. And we have a taunt and a blind jewel. Blind is very, very effective. Taunt is also very effective. You can have the taunt on one jewel and blind on another, but having both of these somewhere on your jewels is a very preferable state. The cluster jewels I will point out that you can find with life modifiers, you can find it with extra resistances or attributes, which will lower the pressure of this on your other gear pieces as well. So I would recommend looking at cluster jewels before buying the rest of your gear, depending on how you progress from low to medium budgets. So let's talk about skills and how this is set up, because this is a complete shit show. And it reminds me a lot about a year ago, no, longer than that. Me and my right-hand man with written guides for PoE 1, Atros, we're doing this forever. And now I have Lolash with me, who's helping me with PoE 2 written guide content. We all three of us used to sit down and theory craft builds on a consistent basis. And we had a guy called Helmbreaker helping us as well when he brought in the Zoomancer, which we worked on together for about 10 months. And after that, I wasn't able to afford to hire him. So he went on to do his own stuff that I'm not part of anymore. But we used to work on the Zoomancer a lot. And something was really cool was that we did this with Spectres back then. This is a long time ago. And we couldn't for the life of us figure out how the hell to calculate the Phantasm DPS output in PoB. And then one day Helm came into the Discord call and he was like, yo, we figured it out. This is a messy as fuck display. Don't touch this in the PoB. This is how you calculate the phantasms. So shout out to Helm for this. He was the one who found the solution to it. So basically, we have a skeleton with a count 11, and the gem level of the skeleton with pluses needs to be equivalent to the level of phantasms, which is 21 in this example. So therefore, we put 17 because I plus 4, which is 21. And then in the skill section of this, you would, in the, where is it? I can't find it now. Summon skeleton phantasm. Here, you would do the phantasm, and then you would do projectile, physical projectile. And by doing this in this specific section, now gives us an accurate DPS display of how much damage the phantasm are bringing, but they also add to the poison. Now, most important reason why we use this has more to do with the approach of this little modifier right here. It is to make the minions recover 5% life on a minion death. The phantasms are very squishy. SRS are very squishy. They're gonna die consistently. This is helping you keep your minions alive. So that is the main purpose behind this. So the setup for our specters is actually to use Ray Spectre with minion life, summon phantasm, and then we have an empower to further increase the level of a Ray Spectre, which increases their efficiencies, but also their survivability. But you can play this without empower. You can play it without phantasm if you want to as well. But this is why and how we're doing it. SRS, the support gem, will have a slight change. We no longer use chance to poison, so the medium budget will have much higher push on poison chance on the jewels. Instead, we're using unbound ailments, which increases the duration. So we're doing more damage on bosses this way. The trigger weapon is the same pressure there. We have Desecrate with Flesh Offering, and then Spell Cascade should be linked with Flesh Offering. So Spell Cascade should be linked with Desecrate and not with your Flesh Offering to separate the two. This is to, again, make sure that you don't have your Flesh Offering eating up the corpses you want to use for your spiders. We have a 1-socket slot for the Animate Guardian, which is the last thing I will talk about, and it's the Hungry Loop ring that this is going to be placed in. I'll explain this at the end of this little rant. Golems, we're now using Chaos Golem for the physical damage mitigation. We're already regenerating 500 life per second, so we'd rather have this to give us as much physical damage mitigation as possible. We have the Spectre setup, and as you can see, the first here says in purple color, 1 Guardian Turtle. If you go to this, it'll say Guardian Turtle on the left, and then there's a little asterisk here, which is going to tell you in the Spectre config that the second Spectre here is Judgmental Spirit. The third Spectre is a Forest Warrior. The fourth Spectre, if you get level 25 Spectre Gem and the Death Attunement oil on your amulet, will be a Spider Matriarch. These are perfect Judgmental Spirits, perfect Forest Warrior, perfect Guardian Turtle, perfect Spider Matriarch, which can be purchased from trade, comes from the ritual mechanic. But they're set like this to make sure that they actually apply to the PoB calculation. So try not to fiddle too much unless you know what you're doing. Outside of this, we have mobility, shield charge, fast attacks, as well as frost blink. And then we have convocation. And then aura-wise, we're running Tempest Shield, lower level precision, balance that with your mana since we don't need mana. And then we have a higher level of vitality to give us life regen for us and our minions. And again, purity of elements to just get ourselves elemental ailment immunity, as well as giving rest to us and our minions. This allows us to, in higher budget, use something like a Watcher's Eye for those of you who are experienced with PoE 1, which is extremely good. Chaos resistance. We have the determination from the Guardian Turtle, allowing us to run physical damage mitigation from there, even reduce damage on crits and other features. This does end up with giving us 1 free socket. Never, never, ever use Vol Haste or the Haste. You don't want to use the Haste in this. And in PoB, never check the Vol Haste because it inflates the DPS numbers and it just bloats it, and you don't actually do this amount of damage. If I click this, it says I get 2 more million DPS. We don't have that all the time. Just make sure it's unchecked when you do a look at builds like this. That pretty much covers. Now, second last thing I want to talk about is the Despair from AG and the AG, the PoBs. So I'm going to go back to the low budget real quick just to talk about this, and it is the Animate Guardian. So if I go to Animate Guardian like this, you can see that the Animate Guardian is able to use a certain set of gear. In this case, it's the low budget Animate Guardian set, which is perfectly fine. However, in the medium budget version, we have the Animate Guardian. Sorry, medium budget. Thank you. Animate Guardian. He is using medium budget AD gear setup, and this is done by checking the gear sets here. So in low budget, you'll be using a simple Dying Breath staff, Learcast helmet, and like I mentioned several times already, a Gruthkul's body armor, and then we'll have a gloves and boots, just rare with life and resistances, preferably chaos rest, and that's it. However, the medium budget Animate Guardian is a little bit special. Dying Breath, Learcast, Gruthkul's pelt, and then you use a Windscream boots, which allows him to apply an additional curse. Since he can apply 2 curses, he can then apply 1 more curse than I am applying, and therefore you as a player with your minions can apply 2 curses if the second curse is applied by the Animate Guardian wearing boots like this. Therefore, we'll use any sort of corrupted gloves with Despair on hit. So this is how we apply Despair on hit. Since the Ascendancy will be using the Penance mark, which is a curse, we'll do this to apply Despair. In higher budgets, I don't think it's fitting for a medium budget because it's going to cost a ridiculous amount of currency. You would have to add Despair on hit on something like a pair of Asenath gloves. And the reason you do this is because then you also get Temporal Chains, and the Temporal Chains would increase the duration. You can apply poisons, which will drastically scale your damage output. Like insane how much damage that would add. So I can show you how much that would apply in a build like this. If I were to add even a level 1 Temporal Chains, and I do this, my damage should be going up drastically if I do this. So that's another 2.5 million DPS output as an example, and that's just on this budget. So that's how you check the Animate Guardian gear. Let's talk about the last thing before I end this extremely long rant of a build guide for this build. Not even able to show you gameplay footage because we don't have access to the actual Ascendancy until the actual launch of the event, and that is to talk about Hungry Loop. So Hungry Loop is a ring with a socket in it that you can place a skill. If you have a level 19 skill gem and you put that skill gem inside the Hungry Loop and then level it to 20, when it's socketed inside Hungry Loop, it will then be consumed by the Hungry Loop and becomes this type of modifier that says socketed gems are supported by level 20 meat shield, for example. So the way you do this is you would level up a meat shield gem, and then when it's level 19, ready to become level 20, you would put it in the Hungry Loop. You would then level it up inside the Hungry Loop, and it will now become a modifier in Hungry Loop, and the gem disappears. You can do this 4 times. And the 3 only main gems that you care about is Meat Shield, Minion Life, and Feeding Frenzy. This allows you not to need Feeding Frenzy elsewhere, and therefore saves you sockets on your gear. Meat Shield and Minion Life is to keep your Animate Guardian alive. And then the last one is a bit of a free choice, really. I decided to go for Elemental Army because it gives him plus the max elemental rest. The main reason I decided to do this is because an elemental army in the ring would make the ring more attractive to be sold to other minion builds later, should you choose to play something else. And I didn't feel like adding another gem in there because I didn't feel that it brought any value to my character. So adding an elemental army in the last one allowed me to sell the ring later if I want to change the build or use it for another character, for example. Or you can just leave the slot open. It's up to you. So that's how the Hungry Loop works and how it operates. So what I would do when I play this build, I would actually prep for this ring by leveling these gems in my off weapon slot and level them up as I'm getting ready to transition into a medium budget state. My voice is disappearing, so I hope this covers all the information. I hope I didn't miss anything. The bandits in Act 2, kill them all. You want the skill points. Pantheons I already covered. I hope I didn't miss anything, and I'm very excited to play this because it's going to be very different from your ordinary Poison SRS or Poison Sue, Poison Minion builds in general, because we're going to run with the spiders, and I'm very excited for the massive amount of spiders that are going to spawn and how we're going to use this as a single target. And yes, before someone asks, I have verified on stream earlier today at the time of this recording that you can have 20 spiders stacking on one another, attacking a player, which is a very small hitbox, at the same time as you have 20 Radiant Spirits hitting the same target. So they do not body block each other. This has been tested and confirmed. So I'm very excited to see level 20 spider numbers and see how this build feels to play. Hope you guys will enjoy this. Let's end this rant. If you like this, hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Leave a comment down below what you think of this build. If you're excited to play this or if you have another approach, let me know. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, as always, stay safe and keep rocking. God, my voice is fucked. Oh, bye-bye.